Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week I have Tony Munday, the Maverick Mediator, joining me. And we're going to explore the subject of conflict in the workplace and what we can do about it. So Tony, welcome to the HR Uprising podcast.
Great, thanks Lucinda. Pleasure to be here.
So tell me a little bit about how you came to be known as the Maverick Mediator, and whether this is something you've done all along or it's something that you evolved, your career brought you to this point.
The short answer is it's an evolution of my background in leadership. So I was a senior leader in the police, and I adopted a coaching style of leadership. So very much people focused. Okay. I then became an internal mediator in the police with all the challenges that go with that. So I can very much empathise with HR colleagues who are frankly seen as part of the management. A HR person explained a very complex mediation involving senior people at an academy, head teacher and 5 members of the senior leadership team, and asked me if I could assist. And that reminded me that I could actually do mediation. So we conducted a mediation, which was very successful. And interestingly with that, and it's been a bit of a theme, is formerly all 6 people, because there were 6 people involved in the mediation, they were all former friends. And then it had deteriorated to the extent that 3 of them would not communicate with the head teacher other than by email. So you can imagine it was an ingrained situation. 3 rounds of grievances had gone on, and the person who'd asked me if I could contribute, she was the HR governor, if you will, for the board of governors, and they were considering sacking everybody, because it had just gone on for 3 years. So the result of the mediation was successful, and nobody was sacked. So that reignited my passion for that particular type of mediation, and then I subsequently undertook a accredited training with ACAS for a certificate in internal workplace mediation, which wasn't a just turn up and you pass. There was external verification, and you could absolutely fail.
Got you. So, because of course you've written 2 books. Your first book was The Essential Heart of the Leader, and your second book is The Maverick Mediator. So this shows your same evolution from being all about leadership and leadership development through to then supporting with mediation.
Yes, and so it's a proactive approach to minimise the potential for conflict. You can't eradicate conflict, but by taking the early intervention, the awareness, how to have difficult conversations, how to engage with your team and manage people, absolutely, then that will help. And that's the link, potentially with HR colleagues as well.
Let's talk about workplace mediation and in terms of this and different types of conflict. And I don't actually know a huge amount about this. So are there different types of mediation or conflict that we need to know about?
Yes. So that is the first challenge, really, which was principally behind me writing the second book, was that the understanding of mediation is variable, but also the nature of mediation is variable. I'll just mention the other aspect that sometimes people confuse mediation with arbitration. So arbitration is when an external person would come into a workplace situation, listen to both sides or the number of sides, and then come down and say, this is what's happening. Right. That is absolutely not mediation, but sometimes people are confused. The other challenge is that people are aware of family mediation, civil mediation, commercial, and in those circumstances, particularly civil and commercial, people would understand that the mediator effectively does like a Henry Kissinger, shuffles from one to another, and it's really a negotiation. So, I've had any number of discussions with other colleagues that, to use the term mediation like that is not really helpful, because that is not what happens in a workplace mediation. To go from one to another, to make use of knowledge gleaned from one participant, because I don't use the term parties, because that's a bit adversarial. So it's quite different. So apologies, but I think that little preamble hopefully helps people. So with workplace mediation, so do you want me to describe how I operate workplace mediation?
Yeah, please.
Right. Okay. So the first thing, and this is based on my background as a detective, is I actually have a pre-mediation meeting stage, or icebreaker. That's where I will meet individually the participants on their own. We do not talk about the matters relating to the mediation. It's entirely about rapport building, trust and confidence, but also it's around the participant explaining their experience of mediation, because that can be really enhance the trauma, if you like, of what's happened. So a very quick example, if I may, is a senior manager I met in this circumstance. Now, she told me she was 34. I didn't ask. She told me. Once I'd outlined how the mediation process works, I could see the body language change entirely, and she actually broke down in tears. And what it was is that when she was 17, she was being bullied at a school. And so the headmaster said, we're going to have mediation. So I said, what was that like? She said, right, myself and the bully went to the headmaster's office. He sat in the corner. I sat opposite the bully. For an hour, he shouted and swore at me, the bully. So I said, what happens then? She said, the clock went and the headmaster said, right, time's up. So I said, what happened then? She said, we went outside and the bully beat me up. So for 17 years, she has thought that mediation is that. And with similar examples, that's why I thought, I've actually got to, frankly, I was compelled to write a book, because I thought this cannot be right, that we've got people, notwithstanding any conflict, people have got such a misapprehension that they're traumatized before you start.
So I can see why it's really important to sort of put some wrap around this to take care of the whole person, and it's not something you do to people, it's almost you're building that relationship. This is this your chrysalis method that you refer to?
Yes. So thank you. So so that's in sort of 5 stages. So stage 1 is what we described there.
The value, the rapport building bit, where you get the
you
don't talk about the content of the case, but you just get to know
not at all.
Trust you.
Not at all. Not at all. And what the value of that is that normally leave at least a day in between that stage and then what is normally the first stage in any workplace mediation, which is the individual meeting. That's when the mediator meets the individual person, either supported by a friend or a staff associate representative. Now, because I've actually created that safe space and that rapport, when I meet the still traumatized client, they and I are not strangers to each other. That's really, really important. And they've had a day to diffuse and consider all the aspects they want to talk about. Other workplace mediators would turn up. Quite often there'd be time limited, right? We've got an hour. And then almost instantly, they're supposed to have rapport, trust, and confidence of the participant, which I think is madness.
Yeah.
And very disrespectful, very disrespectful. And then the stage after that is the joint meeting. So that's when all the participants come together. And most importantly, as a mediator, compared to an arbitrator, I will have heard things from different perspectives during those individual meetings, but I'd never reflect that to subsequent individual meetings. And so because I've signposted the process, how it's going to work, and particularly for the joint meeting, we agree ground rules, which essentially are around respectful listening, so body language, etc. And it must seem obvious, I think, because of because it seems this is how it should be, but there are very well-known firms of mediators who do not have any ground rules. And I couldn't believe this when I heard that. So that literally people who are already in a challenging scenario, I won't use the words, but literally people are able to, what I'd call it, F and blind, can move outside, can slam a chair open, all this sort of thing. Quite horrendous.
So your ground that makes it much easier for you to correct behaviour if you've got everyone to agree to,
absolutely,
sort of thing. You can step
absolutely.
In. Yeah,
absolutely.
That does seem like a very an essential thing. I see why that's
yes.
Can I just go back a step and ask you a question, Tony? Though, because
of course,
and I'll bring you back if you're mediating, you're presumably mediating between both sides, and that second step you talked about, initial meeting with let's say the injured, the person who's raised the grievance, whatever.
No, it's with everyone. Sorry, everyone.
So you build rapport separately with both parties. Yeah, and then do you have?
Say both. Sorry, it can be any number of parties. So that example I gave you, there was 6 people involved.
So you met each one of them and built rapport.
Yes.
And then you met each one of them again separately.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
then to discuss,
to formally hear what their point of view was.
Yes. Absolutely.
And then you get into the joint meeting where you have your ground rules established. Don't swear, and basic courtesy, and don't throw things.
Yes. And obviously we've necessarily shortened it, but the one of the key aspects for me of the individual meeting is where I will understand what I'd call the difference between someone's position, i.e. this is what's happening, to actually their true interest, which is what they're really looking for. And another aspect, which is at variance with either employment lawyers and others who do workplace mediation, they will quite often get a very detailed brief, from the organisation. Right, I don't want that, because that would subjectively impact on my mindset. All I want to know is the name and initially the email address of the participants. So we are meeting, as I would term it, use an NLP phrase, in a very clean way. Mm-hmm. That's really, really important.
So just tell me again. So what you're saying there, that you sometimes highlight where people are, their position is different from what they're actually after. Is that because you know what they're after from the previous conversation?
But no. This is within the individual meeting. I'm saying we deal with how they present. So that's their position, right? This is why I'm unhappy about whatever's going on, to use that sort of language, right? But as a result of active listening and all of those aspects, I will actually ascertain what their interest is, i.e. what's behind it, what is really going on for them. Okay. So no, that is kept within the confines of the individual meeting. So I do not pass that on to the next individual meeting I have, and I don't at the joint meeting. And so at the joint,
you get underneath it, you know what they're really looking for.
Yes.
So they might be being really cross, but actually they're really hurt because
they never get any recognition for a job well done or whatever. There's something underneath it, so you get what the real true position is.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, and the key bit for individuals is that sometimes they haven't been in the same space as other participants for a number of years. So it's a really critical change from the individual to the joint meeting. So because I've built up the trust, because I've signposted the process, the ground rules, etc., which of course, if I use the term, I'll reiterate, stroke enforce. So in other words, if someone doesn't adhere, well, then using appropriate language, I would say, well, we've all agreed that this is going to be the manner in which we can conduct the meeting, with respectful listening. And what I also then do, because you can imagine this can be really emotional for people, is it's about 5 minutes. That's all people normally need to explain the impact on them as a person. So it's not, this is what I did on Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, all of that, because everybody has got an understanding of the individual activities. No, but this is probably the first time that the participants have actually been required really to recognise each other as people with a human impact.
So you've got 6 people together in this example, or 2 people, but it together, and you get them to talk about the impact of this conflict on them.
Yes, they agree amongst themselves, or if necessary, will draw lots as to the batting order, if you like. And everyone is very clear because I've signposted how the joint meeting will run at the end of the individual meeting, and I reiterate that. So everybody gets equal time, and then at that point, when everybody has gone through the human impact on that, then we take a break.
So you let that
and
line
then and then the second part then is what is termed the written agreement. So I facilitate the meeting, but the participants themselves, they will create and design what I call their positive future. So it's not me to say you must do X, Y, Z, but I facilitate them conversing, sometimes for the first time in years, how they wish things to go moving forward. And that written agreement is signed by everybody, including me. It's confidential, but it can be shared with the unanimous agreement of the participants. Now, invariably, they will like the head of HR to know, the CEO, etc. And then, so that's stage 3. So stage 4 is then a review process. But also what we'll agree at the end of the joint meeting, what I'd call a contingency, just in case something occurs, then we can have a quick intervention to stop the whole thing unraveling. And then the review is 2 parts. That's normally after about 2 months or so, to see that it's how things are going. And then everyone gets an equal opportunity to describe that. That's part 1.
Okay. Part
2 of the review is where I will be able to ask them, well, what's behind all this? Are there systemic issues in the organisation or whatever? Using very neutral language, but we ascertain the core issues. Now that's really fantastic business intelligence for an organisation to know. So that's stage 4. So stage 5, so you can see how it's now developed, is then using an accredited technique called structured debriefing. I'd have a discussion with either the head of HR and or the CEO and explain the core issues. We would then get all the relevant people together in a structured way to, if you like, problem solve what those issues are and their ideas of potential solutions. Now, at that point, I will then have created a report for the organisation, and then I leave it with their OD people or whatever to move it forward. So you can see, hopefully, that it's morphed wider than just dealing with an immediate crisis.
Yes. So so you're protecting the person in terms of the rapport bit at the start, so you're getting more deeply underneath it, and then the structured debriefing, hopefully that's where you're doing more for sort of preventing it from happening in the future, ideally. So you're trying to fix
yes
it.
Yes, because we've taken, to use a police phrase, we've taken an intelligence-led approach. So the participants who are in conflict, they quite often know why things have happened. It's not just personalities. So we look at system issues, and then we take that information, and then I'd have a meeting, say, with the CEO or the HR business partner, to explain this is what's been said, because this is all shared with agreement, because people want this dealt with. And then we get the people together who are involved in these, if we say these issues, that's probably the best way to put it. And then following a structured process, which is about 2 hours, we get all the intelligence out that would actually be invisible to the organisation. I provide a report, and then they can take it forward, dealing with those wider issues.
Okay. All right. So I get that process. So is that an ACAS process, or is that the one where you've top and tail?
Right. So the ACAS process is, and the same with any other workplace mediator, is the individual meeting and the joint meeting. That's
steps
that's
2
all
and 3,
they do.
basically. Right.
So they just do 2.
You do more, which obviously involves much more time. But it's like you're protecting the individual, and you've got the systemic sort of OD solution. So hopefully you're solving it longer term. So if I just went back to the joint meeting, I mean, you made it sound very easy, where you said, so they say how their impact statement or whatever it is, they go off on break and then come back and talk about their future, and everyone signs paper and it's all happy.
No,
happy. Well,
right. Okay, and I'll give a little example. No, hopefully I'd use the word, this is an extremely emotionally stressed situation, extremely so. Okay, and as people are giving their individual feedback on how things are for them, there are tears, there's apology. It's enormously emotional, enormously. Now, in that example I gave of the academy, that was absolutely the case, because bearing in mind, and it's not unusual, we were talking about people who were formerly friends, where it had all deteriorated. So we took a break, and that also leads to another aspect. Is really important to organise these activities in a really appropriate neutral venue. In this case, it was at a golf club. So we then broke for lunch, right? So these are people who hadn't been talking for 3 years. So I had to take a call. As I came back into where we had the buffet lunch, I could hear laughter. I could see people sharing their phones, talking about their kids. They hadn't been doing this for years. So I'd allocated 45 minutes for lunch. It ran for an hour and a half. We then got back because they were clearly re-establishing a good relationship. And then that's when we worked part 2 after that break on the written agreement.
I can see that. So that's because then they kind of fundamentally cared about each other and were probably really upset that the impact had gone as bad as it was.
Yes.
What you must have had situations where people don't really want to come to the table. I mean, does it always work?
Right. I'm looking around for some wood here to touch. Right. Because I know it sounds simplistic, so I apologise if it's my lack of erudition in speaking. But if we go back to the icebreaker, which is unique, right? No one does this. Sometimes mediators may phone up just to say, hello, my name's Fred or Frida, but that's about the extent of it. No, I actually meet the people concerned. And if you think back that when I was doing that rapport building before interviews, this isn't an interview, but if I go back to my police career, the type of activities that I was going to be speaking to people were very intense. So I know that this works. And of course, because I'm attuned to body language, etc., I'm seeing literally the state of people, their physiological and psychological state for when I first see them at the beginning of the icebreaker pre-mediation meeting to the individual meeting. And at the end of that individual meeting, I know that they're in a good place.
Yeah.
Because they're telling me, they're exhibiting all the facets. And they know that it's going to be challenging for everyone at the joint meeting, but everyone's in that place. So all I can say is that because of being aware of what to look for, what to listen out for, how to develop rapport, how to actively listening, all of these aspects combine so that by the time we come to a joint meeting, I know everyone is invested in it because they've already explained their true interest at the end of the individual meeting. So that's not going to be achievable unless we have a joint meeting and ultimately we agree that can't happen. And that's the real power of mediation, is the participants who've been in conflict, they design the way things are going to be. It's not imposed. And the dynamics of power, all those sorts of things, they fade away because we work at a human level.
Yeah. So it's delicately helping them to find a win-win solution, really, in terms of something really effective.
Yes.
So
yes,
I mean, that sounds great. I guess, is there something in terms of, for HR professionals, if you were giving guidance to them,
yes,
could they do something like this? Are there any practical tips that you would like to share with HR professionals?
Okay. Right. Leaving aside, buy the book when it comes out in March. Yeah. But quite on a serious note, it is designed to educate. Right. So the first stage for me is if people know how things can be, well, then that really empowers them. So in terms of HR colleagues, so I see the role of HR as enabling managers to manage, to provide them with the knowledge, the expertise, and then the training so that they can actually manage people effectively and fairly. And so that includes, training, et cetera, and refreshers. But also there could be practical examples where, the proverbial term, difficult conversations, right? So I'm imagining, they could organise sort of workplace seminars, things like that. But the challenge, I think I alluded to it when I was an internal mediator in the police, the challenge is that even when HR colleagues are trained to the hilt in workplace mediation, sadly, they are seen as part of the management structure.
So your book, The Maverick Mediator, what does this say? Does this show people HR how to do things, or how does?
Right. Okay. What I would say is that it illustrates the model in detail, and it's actually really treating and they are traumatized participants seriously. It's not about organizational convenience, let's do a bit online and all that sort of stuff. Let's just, you stay in your office, you stay in that office, and it's all over in an hour. Yeah, if you want to be superficial, absolutely. But these are deeply ingrained traumas. That's what the experience is. And the change, so I'll give a very quick little scenario. So I was conducting individual meetings in an organization, and then we broke for lunch. So I was walking along the corridor, and the door was open, and I saw a lady with glasses who looked up and said hello and smiled. So I said, "Oh, hello." And then she said, "You don't recognize me, do you?" She took her glasses off, and then I did. She'd never worn glasses when we'd met. She was part of a group of 5 senior managers who'd had real challenges in acting professionally together, to the extent that when they went to partnership meetings, other organizations were telling the CEO, "You've got to sort it out." So once I'd recognized who she was, I said, "Oh, nice to meet you." She said, "Great." And I said, "How are things?" She said, "Fantastic." She said, "I can never thank you enough." Oh. And I said, "Well, that is thanks enough." So it's completely unexpected. and it was just wonderful to hear. Wonderful to hear.
Made a difference in that person's life, because as you say, people take it home, don't they? So it's not just in isolation.
No.
So thank you so much, Tony, for joining me today and taking me through your 5-step chrysalis method. I can see how you've enhanced the traditional mediation, and also I think the sort of idea really is, as HR professionals, it's not so easy for us to be the mediator. And I was reflecting on that, and I think one of the reasons is also because you're the custodian of the disciplinary process and the grievance process and all those sort of things. So you have roles to play, so it is easier to have someone external and neutral in there that you can draw on. Or I guess you could train internal mediators, as you were in the police force. But
the challenge, sorry, Lucinda, but the challenge is anyone in the same organisation. Bear in mind, mediation is about confidentiality.
Got to have a lot of trust, haven't you? So Tony, if people want to reach out to you and get in touch with you, how would they best contact you? Okay,
well, I'm on LinkedIn under Anthony Munday with an H in the middle.
And it's Monday with a U rather than an O, rather than the day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And there's my website, which we're developing, so people can sort of see a bit more about this sort of stuff, and on the LinkedIn actually has my mobile as well as an email, because I think that was an old BT advert, wasn't it?
We'll put on the show notes as well.
And it's always good to talk. I don't take a conversation as right, the clock's ticking. No, in terms of fees, no. The first stage is let's have a conversation, because it may be that I'm appropriate for the scenario, or if not, I may well be able to signpost whoever gets in touch with other colleagues. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining me today on the HR Uprising podcast, Tony.
Lovely. Thank you for the opportunity.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.